Welcome, my loyal viewer. This is Copeland Revelations TV. Kindly share, watch, and let us impact our generation together. Today, I want to talk about that topic that I've named Ignorance is a Limitation and a Liability. Ignorance is a limitation and a liability in our lives, in our ministries, in our businesses. And this is what I'm bringing to you tonight. I believe with this light of light and revelation, you are going to be helped. Your families are going to be liberated in Jesus' name. So, I want to, number one, begin by making a very powerful opening statement that men who have knowledge in this life will always act like gods before men who are ignorant. If you are having information, if you are knowledgeable, if you are well informed, you will be like a god before illiterate and ignorant men. So, ignorant and illiterate men appear as a demigod, appear as useless people before men who are informed. Somebody listen to me. Sometimes the issue is not the deficiency of grace. We have been talking about grace. If you see one person making it big in life and in ministry, in business, we say, oh, that man has just been graced by God. Does it mean that God is so limited and he shows partiality in giving grace? I don't believe so. So sometimes when you look at men succeeding in different areas in life and destiny, sometimes we do not talk about grace there. And sometimes if you see men who are failing in business, who are failing in life, ministries, also sometimes the issue is not the deficiency of grace. It is not that the grace is not there to make it big in ministry, to make big ministry work. Grace can be there, but because people are ignorant, they will still be equally yoked with the people who do not have grace. So you can be in a place, the grace has already been given. You don't lack the grace. But because you are ignorant, because you lack information, because you are not informed, you do not know, you will still suffer the pain, the turmoil, the anguish, the frustration of those people who do not have grace. Just because you are ignorant, yet you carry grace. You will be equally yoked with the people who are illiterate, they have no information, and they also do not have grace. They don't have grace. I want you to understand something here. You can confess something, you can declare something, you can proclaim something which you have no understanding of. You can speak about something which you do not have a tangible evidence, a tangible result concerning it. Many people have been talking, have been speaking things that they have no understanding of. So it is true that men can confess, they can decree, they can declare, they can talk boldly of things that they do not have understanding of. It is true. Let me show you something here. Go with me. Let me show you something here. Do you know that the mantle of the supernatural that Jesus Christ walked in here on earth, he picked it from John the Baptist. It was John who first carried that power and the spirit of Elijah. It was Elijah who first of all walked in the supernatural. We saw John or Elijah multiplying bread, multiplying oil to the Zarephath woman. We saw Elijah walking and suspending the laws of nature, gravity. He was carried into heaven. He defied the laws of gravity. So when we saw Jesus also being levitated as he was going to heaven. He ascended, he went to heaven as the disciples were looking at him as he was going. He was levitating and he was taken. It defied the law of gravity. Jesus also multiplied bread and fish on the mountain, and he used the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish to feed 5,000 men. These were some of the things that we saw operating in the life of Elijah. When John the Baptist came with the power and the spirit of Elijah. Even though we never saw him walk in the power of Elijah, does not mean he did not carry it. Sometimes, yes, he carried it, but because of ignorance, he was not able to sufficiently use it maximally in the sight of man. John walked in the spirit and the power of Elijah, but we only saw him operating in the spirit, not the power of Elijah. I'm tending to think that he also never walked in the power of Elijah because of ignorance. So he could not sufficiently make use, exercise, and maximally use that power that was upon him, that mantle. So when Jesus came, Jesus picked the mantle of the supernatural from John, and John received it from Elijah, because John came as Elijah. He came in the power and the spirit of Elijah. Let me show you. I have explained to you, it was not Jesus who first multiplied bread. Let this enter you. It was Elijah. Go read the book of 1 King, chapter 17, 18, chapter 17 and 18. You are going to see that it was Elijah who first multiplied bread. It was not Jesus who first defied the law of gravity. It was Elijah. Go and read when he was levitated, when he was carried with the chariot of fire to heaven. Somebody listen to me. If a person dies, the investment of the spirit does not die with him. Those mantles, those graces, those anointing, they remain hanging on the air. And anyone who presses into them carries them. Anyone who presses, who pays the price, will stumble into those graces, those mantles. You have heard men talk about the mantle of Benson Idahosa, the mantle that men like E.W. Kenyon walk on in, the graces that men like men like Reinhard Bonke of blessed memory walked in. These men, they never went to heaven with these graces and mantles. If you want the grace for the supernatural, if you want the grace for evangelistic, Reinhard Bonke of blessed memory did not carry his mantle to heaven. When men transit to glory, their mantles remain here on earth. In heaven, mantles are not required in heaven. God is already there with all his power. It is his kingdom. Mantles are required here on earth so that we bring the earth that is under the bondage into freedom. So mantles are not required in heaven. Hence, when men who carry them transit to glory, they don't go to heaven with those mantles. They leave them here. Those mantles are hanging on the air, and any man who presses into them receives them, carries them. I am explaining a very powerful mystery here. I want you to believe. If you don't want to believe, it is up to you. But by now, you know that John the Baptist carried the spirit and the power of Elijah, even though he did not walk in that power of Elijah. When John the Baptist died, when the news got to Jesus, Jesus departed to a lonely place. Somebody get this. You go read the book of Matthew. When John the Baptist died, go read the book of Matthew and Luke. When JB died, John the Baptist, when he died and the news reached to Jesus, immediately Jesus departed to a lonely place. Jesus went to a lonely place alone, himself. He went to a lonely place. I am tending to ask myself, what was Jesus doing in a lonely place? Immediately he heard that John the Baptist died. I want to believe that Jesus was aware that John was going to be killed. Jesus was God. He was fully man and he was fully God. So the death of John did not take him by surprise. He knew that John was going to be beheaded in prison. But why is it that when he heard that John died, John was beheaded, he moved to a lonely place, and in that lonely place he just stayed there alone? What was he doing? I want to tell you the secret. Jesus was starting to carry the mantle of Elijah that John carried. Jesus was tarrying. He went to the secret place to pray, to tarry, so that he can carry that mantle. And true to that, he carried it. And we saw him replicating what only Elijah did in the Old Testament. It was the only Elijah who multiplied food in the Old Testament, and also Elisha. But Elisha and Elijah were one thing, because Elisha carried the double portion of what was in Elijah. We saw Elijah walk. He walked on what? How do I call it? Elijah defied the law of gravity. He was carried. And Jesus also, when he came, he levitated. He was carried, defied the law of gravity. At the same time, we saw Elisha calling the head of the axe. When the head of the axe fell on the water, Elisha called it back. It also had power over water. He had power over water. When Jesus came, we saw Jesus walking on water. This was only something that was unique with Elijah and Elisha. They were the one who had power over water. Same Elijah shut down the heaven for 3.5 years. 3.5 years. He had the power over water. When Jesus came, he also walked on water, telling us that he also had the power that Elijah had to shut the rain. Elijah had the power over water. Jesus also walking on water shows you that he had the power over water. The things that only Elijah could do. Only Elijah could do. So Elijah died, but when John the Baptist came, he came in the power and the spirit of Elijah. When Elijah died, when John was beheaded, when he died, he did not carry the power and the spirit of Elijah to heaven. He left them on the air. And any man who was hungry enough, any man who was thirsty enough, stumbled into the spirit and power of Elijah for the supernatural. After Jesus came, after he had the story and he went to tarry to pray alone in this lonely place, it was in that lonely place that people saw him. And people began coming to him. And when he saw a large multitude of people coming to him, Jesus came from where he was, the mountain where he was, a lonely place where he was starting to carry the supernatural that Elijah gave, or John the Baptist carried from Elijah. And now John the Baptist has died, he has been beheaded. Jesus is now starting to carry that mantle. When he carried that mantle, the first miracle that Jesus did, he did them out of the spirit and the power of Elijah. Let me show you. When Jesus was on the mountain trying to pray and tarry to carry the mantle of John, the multitude saw him there. And those multitude, when they came, Jesus began teaching them. And he taught them for 3 days straight. And after the third day, the disciples came to Jesus and told him that these people have been on this mountain for 3 days straight without eating. Release them to go and look for themselves food to eat, because they are hungry, and you cannot just release them to now go into their homes. They are hungry. And then Jesus is telling his disciples to give them food. Give them food. You yourself give them food. And the disciples are like, where do we get the food? We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish here. Now, I want you to understand, Jesus, why was he telling his disciples to give them food? Why was he telling these disciples to give them food? Go read that book. Go read that book. The story of how Jesus fed the disciples. Why was he telling them to give them food? Did he not know that these people did not have any food? Jesus knew. But if he was telling these people to give them food, there is a secret that Jesus knew that these disciples did not know. There is a secret that these disciples did not know, but Jesus knew it. Jesus knew that John had already died, and any man who presses can tap into the power and the spirit of Elijah. And the power and the spirit of Elijah, we saw through his power and spirit the supernatural happening. Multiplication of bread, shutting up of rains in heaven. We saw him define the law of gravity. So even multiplication of food was a reality that these disciples could do if only they knew that the grace, the power and the spirit that was upon Elijah, which John came, he walked in, that grace, that spirit and power, John did not die with it. It was there, and any man who could press into it would carry it. So Jesus was trying to speak to the disciples in a way, trying to enlighten them, talking to them in parable. John has already left, but he has not gone with his mantle. The mantle is hanging here. If you can press it, you can get into it, and you will move in the supernatural. So the issue that Jesus had with his disciples was that they were ignorant of times and the seasons. These disciples were ignorant of times and seasons. Every time a father of faith, every time a man of grace has transited to the world of no return, every time a man, an embodiment of grace, a system that God has used to showcase a certain grace to his generation, when that man transits to a glory, when that man dies, the thing that happened is that grace leaves it behind. So you should be wise. You should be very discerning of times and seasons. Every time a man who carries grace transit, know that the mantle is there, and the man should be pressing to carry it. So imagine this mantle for the supernatural came upon the disciples, but they could not discern, they could not walk in it. Anything that you do not know, you cannot walk in it. Any grace that you carry, but you don't know that you carry it, cannot still help you. You can be having a result, you can be having an answer, the resource that you need to open doors in your life. But if you do not know that this is the key, this is the answer to my long time prayer, that key, that answer will still not help you. So these disciples are carrying, already John has transited. Jesus has already tarried to carry this mantle, and is now here with the disciple. By a proximity, the disciples should also operate with this grace, with this power and the mantle for the supernatural that Jesus has tarried to carry. But they are proximate with Jesus, they are close with Jesus. They are the close associate with Jesus, but they do not know that they can walk in these things. How is it that during the time that Jesus healed the woman with the blood flow, Jesus is saying, there is a person who has touched me. And the apostles, disciples, his disciples are saying, Master, but there are so many people here, and they are all over you, they are touching you. You cannot know who has touched you. But Jesus insisted, no, it is not about the number. It is about there is somebody who was hungry enough for what I carried, and it tapped into it. The woman with the blood flow problem was hungry enough, and she carried it. It is not about the number. The people that were around and touching Jesus were so many, but they were not hungry enough. But when the woman who was hungry and thirsty for her healing touched Jesus, she carried it. So mantles are there, but only for the men who are hungry and thirsty for them. Men who are hungry and thirsty for them. So, when the disciples went to Jesus to tell him to release the people to go and look for food, Jesus told them that they themselves should give them food. Jesus was not making fun of these men. He knew that these people, The power to do it is already there. It is only that they did not know that they have that power. Already Jesus had carried and carried it for them. Imagine, I want you to imagine this, somebody. The disciples are saying, all we have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. All we have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Media, kindly project for me this verse. This verse. Get me this verse. Project for me this verse. When the disciples are talking about the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Imagine Jesus is telling his disciples to look, to multiply food for these people to eat, because already they have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But 5 loaves of bread cannot feed 5,000 people. All they have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread cannot feed 5,000 people. So the disciples are coming to Jesus and telling Jesus, you know what, Jesus? Release these people to go and look food for themselves. They are hungry. They have stayed here for 3 days. And Jesus is telling them that they themselves, the disciples, to give these people food. Where were they going to get the food? Yet all they have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I want you to understand something, somebody. The 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish represented something. That number 5 and that number 2 represented something. Let me show you. In the spirit, number 5 is a number of grace. In the spirit, get this, in the spirit, number 5 represent grace. Then number 2 in the spirit represent double or multiplication. In the spirit, 5 represent grace, 2 represent double or multiplication. So when these disciples are coming to Jesus and he's telling them that all we have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. In other words, what these disciples were telling Jesus was, all we have is grace. That 5 there represent grace. All we have is grace. Then 2 there represent multiplication. All we have is grace for multiplication. That is what the disciples were telling Jesus. I don't know if somebody has caught that revelation. Matthew chapter 14 verse 17, the Bible says, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I have told you that 5 represent grace, 2 represent multiplication or double. So these people are telling Jesus that all we have, verse 17 of Matthew chapter 14, 17, the disciples are telling Jesus, all we have is 5 representing grace and 2 representing multiplication. So in another word, we can say, they say that we have only grace for multiplication. So Jesus is wondering, already you carry the grace for multiplication. There are 5 loaves of bread and there are 2 fish. And the number 5 there represent grace, and number 2 there represent multiplication. So what you are simply telling me is you have the grace for multiplication. So then multiply the 5 loaves and the 2 fish so that the people, the 5,000 people can eat. That is what Jesus was thinking that the disciples will do. Because the disciples are out, they are proclaiming, they are confessing that, Master, all we have is the grace for multiplication. Matthew chapter 14, 17, all we have is the grace for multiplication. So, in other words, all these disciples, what they were telling Jesus, that all we have is the grace for doubling things. Yet they did not know it, or they never understood what they were saying. And that is why when I was beginning, I told you, you can confess something, you can say something by word of mouth, you can even have the result in your hands, you can carry a grace, but if you don't know you carry it and what it is for, you will not walk in it. It is the same thing these disciples were doing. They carried the grace for multiplication. That grace for multiplication, Jesus had tarried to carry it from Elijah. John, who carried it from Elijah. So these disciples, by association, by them being disciple proximity, they also are able to operate in the grace of multiplication. And the grace of multiplication. I've told you 5 represent grace, 2 represent double or multiplication. So Jesus was wondering, all these people are saying they carry the grace for multiplication, yet they cannot multiply this bread for these people to eat. So Jesus decided and told the disciple in verse 18, bring them here. And when the disciple brought the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fishes, Jesus prayed and there was multiplication. The same thing that Jesus did by just giving thanks is the same thing that he wanted his disciples to do when he was telling them, give them something to eat. But because they did not know they carried the grace, they could not walk in it. So Jesus remained after the issue of multiplication of bread and Jesus releasing the people. At the same time, Jesus himself remained behind. And when he remained behind, he told his disciple to start the journey off. When he remained behind, he continued to carry this mantle for the supernatural that John the Baptist had left. When Jesus was done praying, Jesus followed the disciples, and the disciples left in the evening. Jesus caught up with them in the morning, and he was walking on water. So we are beginning to see the mantle, the grace that was upon Elijah operating in Jesus, because he just knew, because of knowledge, he began operating into these things. There are so many graces that you are not walking in, yet you have them, they are around you, but because you don't know, that is the reason as to why you are not walking in them. Jesus caught up with the disciple who began the journey in the evening, yet for himself he prayed until morning at dawn time, and then he walked on water and caught up with the disciples, the supernatural. The speed that was on Elijah, he walked on the Elijah when he had prayed and told Ahab to go and eat, for he has had the abundance of rain. Ahab was on chariot, but the speed that was upon Jesus, the grace that was upon Elijah came upon him, and Elijah, who was on foot, ran past Ahab, who began the journey before Elijah, and he was on a chariot. Chariots by then were driven by horses. By then, horses were the fastest animals and means of transportation by then. Now a man on foot is running more than and past the fastest animal on earth. Speed. It was that speed that also Jesus received from John the Baptist, who carried it from Elijah. He received it, and that was how he was able to catch up with the disciple who began the journey in the evening. And for him, he did not begin in the evening. He prayed until dawn, and when he finished that speed, he walked on water, and that was how he caught up with the disciples. We saw Elijah walking on air, Elijah calling down fire, Elijah stopping rain for 3.5 years. To mean he had the power over water. Jesus also came and he had power over water. You see, the problem of these disciples is that they were not asking questions. And one thing with Jesus or God, if you don't ask questions, if you don't ask, you won't receive. If you don't seek, you will not find. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 7 verse 7, ask and you shall receive. Seek and you shall find. The disciples were not asking questions. I expected that after Jesus had multiplied the bread and the 2 fish, the next thing that the disciple was to do was to ask the question, Master, why were we not able to multiply the bread? Why? What did you do? But they were not asking questions. And God, if you don't ask, you won't receive. That is one good thing with God. So after Jesus had multiplied food, the disciples never asked anything. They didn't. When Jesus walked on water, they never asked. It was only Peter. Ooh, Peter, I love Peter. I love the spirit of Peter. He began asking questions. Master, if it is really you, call me to come. So it is by then, I think Peter is the one who broke into this realm, and these people began understanding it. So they began asking questions. And that is why one day there was a boy who was epileptic, if I'm not wrong. And the father of this boy brought the boy to the disciples. But the disciples were not able to cast out that devil out of the child. When Jesus came, he said, until when will I be with you here, faithless generation? And then he told the people to bring the boy to him. And he casted that devil out. Then, after casting out the devil out, the disciples began asking, why were we not able to cast out the devil in this man? Then Jesus told them, this kind goeth not except by prayer and fasting. So they knew from that day, if we want to drive certain kinds of things, we have to be men of fasting. Until you ask is when you will receive. I believe you're blessed. God bless you.